Welcome to Module 10, Part 2, the biologic evolution in the Devonian. In this graphical illustration, you can see several things. Along the bottom, you can see the geologic events spanning the Silurian and the Devonian periods. Sea level during the Tippecanoe sequence and Kaskaskia sequence with the dividing unconformity midway through the early Devonian. Above that, you see the timing of the orogenic events. Notice that Gondwana glaciation occurs at the time of the unconformity. Could it be possible that this is the reason for sea level dropping? The top portion are the major biotic events spanning the same period of time, from the Ordovician mass extinction to the Devonian mass extinction. You can see the radiation of land plants, insects, and of course, radiation of the fishes, from jawless fish to the jawed fishes. The invertebrates continued to diversify after the Ordovician mass extinction, including the brachiopods, such as the one in the top picture, and the goniotidic ammonoids in the bottom photo, as well as the corals. The ammonoids were predatory cephalopods with shells. The suture patterns tend to become more complicated through time. Compare the basic goniotidic pattern in this diagram to the suture pattern visible in the photo to the left. Goniotidic ammonoids were quite common from the Devonian to Carboniferous. Ammonitic sutures were most common in the Mesozoic until their extinction at the end of the Cretaceous. Eurypterids, commonly called sea scorpions, were major predators of the late Silurian and into the Devonian. They belonged to the phylum Arthropoda, and some of them grew quite large. This photo is highlighting a probable Eurypterid trace. The dashed lines show where the feet made impressions, and the solid yellow line is where the tail dragged along the sediment surface. For a size comparison, the white arrow near the bottom is pointing at a standard geology rock hammer, which is 22 inches long. The Silurian to the Devonian saw a sudden increase in the evolution and diversity of the fishes. Ostracoderms were among the earliest fishes, evolving in the Ordovician. They were covered with mineralized external plates, and because they had an external skeleton of sorts, they had no internal bony skeleton, including no jaws. They were very likely clumsy swimmers with no paired fins for balance. The fossil record shows us that their mouths were on the underside and their eyes were on the tops of their heads, so they were likely bottom feeders with no real need to be able swimmers. They fossilized so well that they may actually give us a skewed representation of the fossil record of that time. We might, for example, expect that all fish of that time may have been plated when there may have been fish that were not plated at all. The heterostracans had flattened head shields with eyes at the side and mouths on the underside of the shield. Some of them became more hydrodynamic, with cone-shaped head shields that may have also been used to scoop food off the ocean floor. They had a rigid head and stiff-plated body, but their tails were more flexible, which suggests powered propulsion. They still had no jaws and no paired fins. Heterostracans, like this Pteraspis, were most common in the Devonian period. The head area was still plated, but the body and tail were modified and were more flexible. They still had no paired fins, but the configuration of their snout and elongated lower tail fins suggests they were more hydrodynamic than ostracoderms. The osteostracans were bottom feeders, or bottom swimmers rather, with eyes on top of their heads and mouth on the underside. But the osteostracans had something new. They had a small dorsal fin and paired fins for added stability. Their tail and trunks were also more versatile than the heterostracans before them. In the photo of the fossilized osteostracan, you can see the red line showing the outline of the fin. On the top of this slide, you can see an artist's rendering of a little fish called Shuyu. Shuyu was a galeaspid from the Silurian of China. Below, you can see a diagram of a large single nasal opening. Why is this important? Well, nasal openings occur in jawed fish. While Shuyu was still a jawless fish, it is a likely candidate for an ancestor of jawed fish, a transitional species, if you will. They were geographically confined to Eastern Asia, which may also suggest that jawed fishes evolved in Eastern Asia. The evolution of jaws is a major evolutionary step for all invertebrates, and it first appears in fish. This diagram shows how the gills in fish work to supply the animal with oxygen. Oxygenated water flows in through the mouth and flows over the gill filaments, where oxygen-poor blood is enriched with oxygen and distributed to the body. Fish open and close their mouths to increase the amount of water flowing over the gills. This suggests that the evolution of jaws may have originated with the respiratory processes and evolution of the front gill arch into a jaw. Now, the jawless fish were not very hydrodynamic, as we've seen, and as a result, they likely fed on small plankton and bottom detritus and fauna. The evolution and diversification of jaw types in fishes likely increased feeding ecologies by allowing an increased strike speed, increased maneuverability, and increased hydrodynamics of propulsion. In short, they became better predators. This illustration is a placoderm called Dunkleosteus. The placoderms ranged in size from very small fish to very large predators, as you can see in the image with a comparison to a modern human for scale. The placoderm had jaws, and they were swift predators. They still had thick plates around the head, but highly maneuverable bodies. The teeth were actually hard bony plates versus individual teeth, but their jaws had increased pressure for capturing and devouring prey. This is a small placoderm from the Devonian of Australia called Mater piscis. Mater meaning mother and Pisces meaning fish. Mater piscis got its name because we have evidence from the fossil record that Mater piscis gave birth to live young. Looking at this cladogram, you can see that from Shuyu, the jawed fishes, such as the early placoderms, evolve. And with each new set of characteristics, a new group branches on the cladogram. One of the first groups to evolve are the chondrichthyes. These are the rays and sharks. Now, sharks and rays have a skeleton, but it's made of cartilage, which does not preserve well. So there is a poor fossil record, with the exception of their hard teeth. Now, the hard teeth have different morphologies in different species, and that's how we identify them. The bony fish also got their start in the Devonian. The bony fish, known as osteichthyes, have a hard, bony internal skeleton that preserves well, unlike the chondrichthyes. The osteichthyes are further divided into two groups based upon their fin structure: the ray-finned fishes and the lobe-finned fishes. The ray-finned fish were and are still today highly successful. They increased in diversity at the end of the Devonian, when they quickly became the dominant fish group. They were much lighter and swifter predators than other fish of the time. The ray-finned fish have fins attached to the body by a thin but strong membrane that is supported by tough spine-like structures called rays. The second group of bony fishes are the lobe-finned fish. The lobe fins include the coelacanths and the lungfish, which are extant, and the tetrapodomorphs. The lobe-finned fish had strong fleshy fins, unlike the filmy fins of the ray fins. The lobe fins were supported by strong bones of the fin, and they were connected to the body by those bones. The illustration above is an example of what an early lobe fin may have looked like. This diagram shows the structure of the fins of the living coelacanth. As you can see, the lobes all have a strong internal bony skeleton, very different from a rayed fin. Now, air breathing probably evolved early in both the ray-finned and the lobe-finned fish. The question is, why? Gill breathing is inefficient, and predators need a greater supply of oxygen to sustain a high metabolic rate. Oxygen is more concentrated in air than in water, and it diffuses much faster in air than in water. So air breathing would have been useful to active predators who would require more oxygen. Ray-finned fish have since lost the ability to breathe air for the most part. Lungfish, a modern group of lobe-finned fish, maintain the ability to breathe air for a sustained amount of time. While the placoderms were adapted for pelagic lifestyles and feeding ecologies, the lobe fins were most successful in shallow water coastlines and inland waters. After the Devonian, the ray-finned fish became dominant, and the lobe fins were squeezed ecologically. They were pushed toward life in the air, and this pushed evolution of the vertebrates yet again. We have reached the end of part 2. In part 3, we will end the Middle Paleozoic with a discussion about the Devonian mass extinction.